Hi, everyone. Welcome. So great to see some faces popping in and some new names popping up in the chat. Thank you so much for being here and for greeting each other and for sharing the space with me this morning. It is a pleasure to have you here. So, I'm just going to let a few more people into the Zoom and then we'll go ahead and get started. Wow, great. All right. Well, thank you so much for being here with me today. It is just after the top of the hour, and we've got about 40 people here live. So we are going to go ahead and get started. Today, we're going to be talking about how to pass your NBHWC board exam, 5 strategies to help you study smarter, not harder. I am so looking forward to spending time with you today. So thank you again for being here. Please do feel free to use the chat. You will be able to pop questions in there, and I'll make sure to get to them throughout and at the end of our time together today. So, if you haven't already, go ahead and grab a notebook and a pencil or open up a Word document so that you can take some notes on what we're going to talk about during our time together today. And while people are gathering their notebooks and their pencils, I would love to have you pop into the chat. In one word, how are you currently feeling about taking the NBHWC board exam? Okay. Ooh, I'm seeing a few answers fly in here. We've got overwhelmed, stressed, nervous, anxious, excited, apprehensive. We've got eager, ready. A few more votes for nervous, anxious, overwhelmed, and stressed. Okay. So we've got like a wide range of emotions going on here, which is great to hear. However, you're feeling about taking the NBHWC board exam is totally valid. And I am really glad that you have a space here to just kind of say how you're feeling and know that you're not alone. It looks like we've got a lot of people who are, yeah, feeling a little bit nervous and stressed out about taking this test. And that makes sense, right? It's a big deal to sit for an exam. And for most of us, we haven't sat for a test in quite a long time. So I totally get why it can be really nerve-wracking. And I'm looking forward to kind of helping ease some of those emotions today. So now I want to know, in one word, how would you like to feel about taking the NBHWC board exam? Go ahead and pop your answers in the chat. Okay, I'm seeing at ease, capable, ooh, like I know the material, confident, excited, like I believe in myself. We've got prepared, calm and ready. Okay, yeah, and we've got some extra votes coming in here for confident, excited, prepared. Awesome. So great to know that there's a little bit of a disconnect between where we are right now and where we would like to be on the day of the exam. And that is totally okay. I'm looking forward to jumping in here and helping you transform some of those feelings of stress and overwhelm into feeling really prepared and confident. So let's go ahead and jump in. Feel free to keep sharing in the chat as we go. So here's what you're going to learn by the end of our time together today. You'll learn the top 3 reasons why my students have not passed the exam. We'll talk about 5 strategies to help you study smarter, not harder. We'll talk about the number one thing that you can do to get prepared. And I'll tell you a little bit about how I can support you in studying for your exam. So, for those of you who don't know me, I would love to just take a moment to introduce myself. So, my name is Sonia Eklund, and I'm a board certified health and wellness coach, a financial social work coach, a learning and development professional, and a behavior change expert with 13 years of experience helping people navigate transitions and change their lives through the power of coaching. So I started growing my coaching business in 2011, and I ran it part time on the side of my corporate coaching and training career until I took it full time in 2024. And in the meantime, I earned over 5,000 hours of coaching experience. I developed the NBHWC approved training program at a leading corporate health and wellness company. I was the lead faculty member of that training program for 3 years. And in that time, I trained over 200 new health coaches, and I helped over 100 students pass the NBHWC board exam. And I managed continuing education for a team of about 300 coaching professionals. So I am a behavior change nerd who's super passionate about helping to level up the professional credibility of the coaching industry, as well as providing high quality coaching to my own clients and helping out coaching professionals along the way. So I'm here to share everything I know about the process of studying for and passing the NBHWC board exam, and I'm super excited to help you do the same. So let's jump in and get started. So, I want to tell you about some of the things my students didn't do so that you can learn from their mistakes. Okay, so the first reason why I see students not pass the board exam is they didn't build an effective study plan. These were the students who sort of sat down for an hour here and there and sort of flipped through the content outline or like flipped through their course materials, but they weren't being particularly strategic about how they spent their time studying. These were also the students who kind of crammed like 2 or 3 long study sessions in, but they didn't give themselves any time to process or recall the information in between their study sessions. They started studying kind of late and then had to just cram some sessions in. Next is they did not study how to think about the questions on the exam. So I love to tell my students that the answer to every question on the NBHWC board exam is it depends. And your job is to figure out the conditions on which the answer depends and then choose the best answer. Something that a lot of students don't know before taking this test is that there is often more than one correct answer, but your job is to choose the best answer for the specific situation that you're given. And there are a lot of great test taking tips and tricks that you can learn that will show you how to do this. But if you effectively know how to think about the questions on the exam, a lot of the time you can use that information to help you find the answer. The third reason was that they didn't plan ahead for the details of exam day or for the exam environment. So these were the students who left their house late, got lost on the way to the exam, couldn't find parking, or were really confused about where to go within the building. It's also the students who forgot a snack or didn't plan ahead for the break that they were taking, or they wore the wrong clothing, or otherwise they kind of just scrambled and missed out on some kind of really important logistical detail. So I want to know, what's your biggest takeaway here? What are you going to do differently now that you know about some of the reasons why students have not passed the exam in the past? Go ahead and pop that in the chat. Okay, I'm seeing build a study plan. I love to hear it. That is one of the most effective things you can do. Do a test drive to the exam center. Great idea. Definitely something I recommend doing. Okay, I'm seeing a question about how to learn these test taking tips and tricks that will teach you about all of this stuff. So, great question. I will answer that in just a couple of slides. And then, okay, yeah, this comment is saying, never would have thought about planning ahead for the exam environment. You are not alone. That is actually a super common thing. And we're going to talk a little bit about what that means and how to do that. And so the last one I'll read here is, yeah, that you don't really know what to study or how to study. That's relatable. That's totally relatable. There's a lot to know about this test and there's a lot to study. So we're going to break that down in a little bit more detail as well. Great takeaways. Thanks for sharing those. So let's get into our 5 strategies that can help you study smarter and not harder. So, number one is to organize your study materials. This is a big deal. There's a lot to know about the exam. There's a lot of materials that you need to study, and it can be really tough to kind of keep track of all that information. So, the first thing is get all of your study materials in one place. This is a vital part of just being organized when it's time to sit down for your study sessions and actually like start studying for the test. So if you have all your study materials in one place, you are not going to be wasting time figuring out like where that hyperlink was or where your piece of paper is for this or that. You're just going to have everything gathered and know exactly what it is that you need to study. The next is to print out the things that you need and decide on a system for taking notes. So we've got people who are paper people who really prefer to study like on an iPad or a tablet, and then people who actually prefer to read on a computer screen. And any of those are totally fine. You certainly don't have to print anything out, but one thing that is important is making sure that once you have all those materials consolidated and in one place, that you also have a system for jotting down notes. It's really vital that you remember whether you're going to be like highlighting things within your documents or whether you're going to be writing notes in the margin. or whether you're going to be like creating flashcards or sticky notes or something, or taking notes on a totally separate piece of paper. But having a system for that is going to really help you out and make sure that you don't get lost, like trying to scramble and figure out where all of your different notes are. Okay, and then the last thing is understand how to use the NBHWC content outline as a study guide. So, this is a big one. A lot of people look at the NBHWC content outline and they just kind of read it. They read it once, they read it twice, and that's great. Repetition is a hugely important thing when studying for a test that has this much information in it. But it's also really important that you understand and recognize how to use this strategically as a study guide. And one of the ways you can do that is by taking notes on the concepts that feel unfamiliar to you, and then using that to create a big list for yourself of concepts that you need to review within your approved training program's materials. So, throughout your study sessions, you are going to be referencing the NBHWC content outline, as well as several other documents that the NBHWC recommends reading. But you're also going to be referencing your approved training program's materials, because that's where the vast majority of the actual like content is going to come from when you're studying for this test. So let's talk about number 2, build a smart study plan. This is a huge deal. We've already touched on this a little bit, but making sure that you sit down and strategically know how to use your time when you're studying is so important. So, one suggestion I have is to progressively add time to build your study stamina. The NBHWC board exam is 4.5 hours long, and that's a really long time to sit and focus on one thing. And for a lot of students, that can be like one of the hardest things about this whole process. So I really encourage my students to progressively add time. If you have, like, say, 8 weeks before your test, maybe you sit down and you start studying in 30-minute chunks. And then as the exam gets closer, you add a little bit more time here and there so that you're eventually working your way up to 4.5 hours. And if you've got less time, you can still follow this exact same idea. If you're like 6 days away from your exam, maybe you sit down and you build your study stamina up like 1 hour and then 2 hours the next day and 3 hours the next day. It's really important to make sure that you are actually physically capable of like sitting for that amount of time and focusing for that amount of time. So, building your study stamina is a huge part of building up your study plan. Next is practicing spaced repetition. So, spaced repetition is all about spreading out your studying so that you have opportunities to sort of like actively recall the information in between your study sessions. And when you do this, when you have space in between your study sessions, this really helps strengthen your memory and retention. You don't need to worry about the specifics here. Like, it's not important to space this on some really specific cadence. The key here is just making sure that you have time to retain and retrieve the information and make sure that you have chances to like retest yourself by actively recalling the information multiple times spaced apart, as opposed to just cramming it all in right at the last minute. And then the third thing is to use passive and active recall. So, passive review would be taking in information through like reading, watching, or listening. And active recall would be where you sort of force your brain to recall and retrieve the correct answer. And so, a combination of these things is really helpful when you're studying for an exam with this much information in it. So, you might use that kind of passive review strategy when you're reading, when you're reviewing a concept in your NBHWC approved training program materials, or when you're just sort of like taking in the information from all the different documents that the NBHWC recommends that you read. Your active recall is going to be more like memorizing the biometrics or creating flashcards around different things within the coaching process section of the content outline, making sure that you have opportunities to really kind of recall that information actively and to make sure that you are quizzing your brain on being able to come up with the correct answer before you tell yourself what the correct answer is going to be so helpful when you actually sit down and take the test. Okay, number 3 is take practice tests. So this one makes a lot of sense, right? You are studying for an actual test. And so it makes sense that you might want to spend some time actually taking practice tests that are going to help you replicate the experience of taking the actual exam. Okay, so the first thing here is learn how to think about the questions on the exam. This one is a super fun one. I mentioned that a lot of times the answers to the questions on the NBHWC board exam are it depends. And you need to figure out what the answer depends on. And so if you learn how to really carefully read the question, a lot of times you can figure out what the answer is, even if you don't actually know the answer. There are some little sneaky tricks and tips that you can use to kind of read the question strategically and read the answer bank strategically so that you can figure out the answer to the question, even if the content is not something that you remember or feel familiar with. The next is to practice replicating the exam's environment. I cannot emphasize this one enough. Most people don't realize that the exam's environment is pretty intense. You are going to be sitting in an environment where the lighting is very bright and there's silence in the room, and where all you're hearing is just like the clicking and clacking of other people clicking forward in their own exam. You're going to hear other people breathing. You might hear people coughing. You're not going to be in like a soothing, calm, quiet environment. And a lot of people just feel really psyched out when they sit down and they are in this kind of like unfamiliar vibe and environment, and suddenly they can't recall anything. So, practicing replicating the exam's environment is a hugely impactful thing to do to ensure that you are really prepared when you walk into the testing center and into that environment for your 4.5 hour test. The next is to build up your study stamina. So, we touched on this a little bit. This is so important to just progressively add time into your study plan so that you feel comfortable and confident sitting down for 4.5 hours and taking a test. This one is something that you can accomplish by taking a full length practice exam. If you seek out a full length practice test, you will be able to sit down and like actually fully replicate the experience of sitting for the exam. And that is one of the most helpful things you can possibly do when you're preparing to take a test that's this long. All right, number 4, review what you got wrong. Okay, so this is a study strategy that you are going to employ after you take a practice test. So it's really important that you analyze why you answered the question incorrectly. Did you answer it incorrectly because you just genuinely didn't know the concept? If that's the case, then you now know that you need to go back to the NBHWC content outline or back to your approved training programs materials and study the concept. But if you answered it incorrectly because you misread the question, or because you didn't totally understand what the question was asking, or for some other reason, that's really helpful information. So if you can actually sit down and review why you answered the question incorrectly, you can use that information to build your study plan even more strategically. The next is use the NBHWC content outline to guide your study plan. So, we already touched on this one a tiny bit, but this is so important after you have reviewed what you got wrong. In really good, high quality practice exams, there will be citations for the different areas of the content outline associated with each practice question. And so when you go in and you like look at a question that you answered incorrectly and you can reference that you need to review 1.2, then you can go back to the content outline and look at what 1.2 is and then cross reference that with your materials from your approved training program. And that strategy of really understanding like how to trace things back and figuring out what to study is hugely helpful when you are taking in so much information. Last but not least is practice active recall for concepts that you need to review. So, again, active recall is that process of actively pulling the information out of your brain, actively practicing retrieving the information and recalling the information so that you can really just gain confidence in knowing what the correct answer is to each of these things. So, an example here is biometrics. There's really no way around just memorizing the biometric information that you need to know to pass this test. But if you, for example, write down a biometric on the front of a flashcard and then you practice recalling what is this piece of information before you flip over the flashcard, you are helping your brain remember that information so much more effectively than if you're just reading a sheet of paper that tells you what all the different biometric outcomes are. Okay, last but not least, prepare for the details of exam day. So, number 1, know where you're going. It is amazing how many students just don't really think of this ahead of time. They're relying on their map, they're thinking that they'll figure it out on exam day, and then they get lost. And that is just so stressful when you are trying to get somewhere on time and when you are sitting for a big test. Our brains aren't totally functioning rationally and normally when we are like about to go do something really stressful for 4.5 hours. So give yourself the gift of looking up your route ahead of time and just knowing where you're going. The second is to plan ahead for the morning of the exam. So you probably already know if you're taking the test in the morning or if you're taking it in the afternoon, but it's really helpful to just kind of think through like, what are you going to do in the morning of the exam? What are you going to eat? What time are you going to wake up? What time are you going to leave? Those details seem so silly to plan for, but if you don't plan for them, they can cause you major problems. And so taking some time to just plan ahead is a hugely important thing to do here. And then understand the details of the testing center environment. So I've touched on this a tiny bit, but the testing center is kind of like TSA. It is a no nonsense environment, and it is a little bit intimidating to walk in there and put all your stuff in a locker and walk through a metal detector and have somebody check out your shoes and your glasses and, pull your sleeves up and make sure that you don't have any answers written on your wrists. Like, that's an unfamiliar environment for a lot of us. And so, if you prepare ahead of time for that environment and you can plan ahead for those stressful things by doing some deep breathing or having a mantra or something else that's going to just help you feel calm and centered, you're going to walk into that testing center feeling a lot better. Okay, I'm super curious to hear which of these strategies did you find the most helpful? Go ahead and pop your answer in the chat. Tell me a little bit about what you're taking away from going through these different strategies that we've just talked about. Okay, Katie says, never would have thought to prepare for the details of exam day. You are not alone, Katie. That is really true for a lot of people who just don't think they need to, right? It's like you just think that you're showing up and that you need to prepare for the content on the exam, but you're not thinking about the details. And yeah, that can cause a lot of stress. Micah says, really good idea to take a full exam instead of just answering random questions on Facebook. Oh my gosh, yes. I'm so glad you brought this up. This is a hugely important thing. There's a really big difference between answering a question that you find on social media or on Chat GPT or on some other like place on the internet and actually sitting down and taking a full length practice exam. Those are two very, very different things. And I also would just caution you about answers or questions that you find on Facebook or on ChatGPT or on YouTube. You want to make sure that the person who's answering and asking those questions actually really knows what they're talking about. They need to be a board certified health and wellness coach, and preferably they need to be a board certified health and wellness coach who has a lot of experience and who's helped students pass this exam. You're not going to get the same quality of information from AI as you are from somebody who's actually been doing this for a long time. And it's not the same thing to just answer a random question on social media as it is to like sit down and fully take a practice test. Okay, I'm seeing a couple other things that I'll comment on here. So Paige says I definitely need to organize my study materials because they're all over the place. Yeah, that is so common. There are so many different things that you're going to be referencing. The first and most important thing that you're going to be referencing is the content outline, but then also you're going to be referencing information from your approved training program, and you're going to be referencing information that the board puts out there that they suggest that you read ahead of the exam. So having all of that in one place, big deal, really, really helpful to just make sure that you know where everything is when you sit down to study. Okay. So let me tell you about the number one thing you can do to get prepared. I've touched on this a little bit, but the answer to this question is to take a full length 150 question computer based practice exam that helps you replicate the exam environment and provides you with an answer key for the questions you answered incorrectly. This is the absolute number one thing you can do to prepare for three reasons. The first is that it gives you a chance to see how it feels to stare at a computer screen for 4.5 hours. That is going to give you some really helpful information about, for example, what clothing you need to wear to the testing center, or whether you need your glasses in order to take this test, or whether your body feels uncomfortable during that amount of time. And then that can help you figure out what you need to do to get prepared to actually spend 4.5 hours doing that. The second is that it gives you a chance to see how you did and whether you passed. That's obviously a big deal. There's a big difference between getting like a handful of questions wrong and getting like 50% of the questions wrong. So it's really important that you just give yourself that opportunity to actually see how you did and whether or not your score was sufficient. And then the third reason why this is really helpful is because it gives you that opportunity to replicate the exam's environment. A really high quality practice test is going to give you very clear instructions for what it actually is like to walk into that test. It's going to break down all of the things that you can do and that you can't do when you're actually sitting at Prometric taking the test. And that information is super helpful to have before you get to exam day. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how I can support you in studying for your exam. I offer two different resources to help students prepare for this test, and I would love to give you the scoop on what you'll find. So, the first thing that I offer is an NBHWC board exam prep course. This is self paced and asynchronous, and it can help you get prepared whether you have 6 months, 6 weeks, or 6 days to get ready for this test. Inside of my prep course, you'll find everything you need to pass the NBHWC board exam. You get access to 400 practice exam questions broken up into a full length 150 question practice exam, two half length 75 question practice exams, five 20 question content review quizzes, and a 100 question combined content review quiz that combines and shuffles all of the questions from the 20 question content review quizzes. You'll also get access to my Preparing for Exam Day quiz, which includes 25 questions to make sure that you are fully prepared for exam day. You get 328 flashcards. I scoured the NBHWC content outline so that you don't have to, and I created stacks of digital flashcards for all 5 areas of the NBHWC content outline. You'll also get to use my active recall flashcards, which really put your retrieval practice skills to the test. In this course, I offer 8 optional online group study sessions, which take place on Mondays at 5 and Thursdays at 10 Central Time in the month leading up to the exam. You'll also get access to a few video modules, one on building a study plan, one on test taking tips and tricks, and one on preparing for exam day. There's an online discussion forum where you'll get a weekly study tip and where you can ask your questions anytime. You'll get access to all of your study materials organized all in one place in one easy to download folder, as well as a place to swap practice coaching sessions with peers. And you'll get a 20-page workbook to help you keep everything about studying for this exam organized. So I offer all of this for $299, and I'm going to pop a link into the chat so that you can check this out if you feel like it would be helpful for you to have a fully robust prep course resource to help you get prepared for this exam. I also want to bring to your attention the fact that when you sign up for my course, you have the option to opt into my money back guarantee. I am really confident that this board exam prep course will help you pass your board exam. I offer a money back guarantee because I really stand behind my product, because I know how hard it is to find someone to trust with the details of your exam prep, and because I want to give my students the maximum amount of peace of mind when they're preparing for this test. In order to take advantage of the money back guarantee, I ask my students to take the steps that my most successful students have taken to pass this test. This includes completing all the course modules, watching all the course videos and completing all sets of flashcards, taking all the quizzes and exams offered with this course, either attending study sessions or asking questions in the discussion forum, submitting your completed course workbook, completing 15 practice coaching sessions in the 3 months leading up to your exam. And don't worry, I provide you with the practice clients. And it includes filling out the money back guarantee form before your exam date. So participating in the guarantee is totally optional. And so if for any reason this list of things doesn't work for you and you don't want to participate, you don't have to. But I'm highly confident that if you do all these things, you will pass the exam. And if you don't, I'll give you your money back. So the other thing I offer is my practice exam bundle. If you're a person who doesn't feel like you could benefit from extra study support, but you could benefit from taking a practice exam, you can get access to a half-length 75-question practice exam and a full-length 150-question practice exam as a standalone product for $199. These practice exams are written in the same style and at the same level of difficulty as the NBHWC board exam, and they are fully based on the NBHWC content outline. With these exams, you get a full answer key, including answer explanations for the correct answers and the incorrect answers, and you get references to specific competencies so that you know what to study after you take the test. It also includes detailed written instructions for preparing for your practice exams so that you can replicate Prometric's testing environment as much as possible. I even designed my practice exams to look as close as they possibly can to Prometric's testing software so that you have a chance to get used to exactly how it's going to feel to look at the Prometric testing screen on exam day. You get 60 days of access with these practice tests, so you can take them as many times as you'd like to during that time. I will pop a link to this into the chat so that you can find it easily if you do want to take a practice exam to help you get prepared. So I am curious to hear from the group. What's your biggest takeaway from today? What are you taking away from our time together and from this chance to just kind of sit down and like nerd out about studying for this test? Okay, Grant says, I need to build a study plan. I have not been strategic with my study time. Fair enough, Grant. That is really relatable. That like sitting down and like really strategically planning out how you're going to use your study sessions is huge. For a lot of people, it's not enough to just say, I'm going to study for 30 minutes. It needs to be more specific than that, right? So, really good call to know that you need to be a little bit more strategic with your study time. Let's see. I'm also seeing Marissa saying that you should drive to the exam center. Totally. That is a great call out, Marissa. Driving to the testing center is a big deal just to gain confidence in knowing where you're going and where you're parking and what door you're going to walk in and all of that stuff. Liza says, I could use more support in studying. Yeah, that's a great thing to know about yourself, Liza. For a lot of people, studying for this solo is really intimidating and really stressful. So I love to be able to offer support either through the discussion forum within my board exam prep course or within the optional drop in study sessions where you can come and ask questions and learn from other students along the way. Rochelle says, I didn't know about spaced repetition or active recall. I'm so glad you were able to learn some of those new terms today, Rochelle. Those are really, really helpful strategies for just making sure that you're studying strategically and effectively. So thanks for sharing that. Okay, amazing. Well, thank you so much. I'm seeing some really great takeaways in here. I so appreciate you sharing the things that you learned and for being here and joining me for our time together today. So, I would love to know, does anybody have any questions? Are there any other things that you'd like to talk about today? If you think of anything after this time together, you can absolutely send me an email at soniaeklund@gmail.com. You can also send me a chat message from my website if you want to get in touch there, but I'll see if anything comes through in the chat. Okay, great question from Xander. So, what score do you need to pass the exam? Really great question. I'm so glad you brought that up. The NBHWC does not publish an answer to this question because the answer changes with every exam cohort. So, something to know about scoring multiple choice tests is that they look at the distribution of correct answers and incorrect answers for each question. And then they might decide to like throw out a question if they decide that something was poorly written, or if maybe like more than one answer choice was correct, if they realized that the answer bank was unclear or that the test question itself just wasn't particularly well written, they might decide not to use that question when scoring the test. So that's a really standard part of scoring multiple choice exams. And it's one of the reasons why it takes a few weeks for you to get your exam results back and why it's not just instant. So I totally get the desire to like want to know the answer to that question and want to know how many things you can get wrong. But I would really encourage you to not keep track of that when you're taking your test. It can be so stressful if you're like sitting there tallying up the number of questions that you're answering incorrectly, and it's not going to help your confidence on exam day. So I would recommend not doing that and just know that the people who analyze the test results are really doing their due diligence to make sure that their test is high quality and really, um, testing you on the information that you need in order to be a board certified coach. Okay, seeing a couple other really good questions pop up in here. Mitch asks, I heard that I get a whiteboard or a piece of paper. What should I do with that? Great question. So You are correct that when you go to the Prometric Testing Center, there will be either a piece of paper or a whiteboard. I think it varies by location, so I'm not totally sure if it's standard everywhere, but you'll get one of those two things, and then you'll be able to jot anything down on the whiteboard or the piece of paper as you start taking the test. So for a lot of students, what they do is they like have something in their brain that they're trying to remember. Like for example, the cholesterol ranges, and they're nervous they're going to forget those things, so they're kind of mentally repeating those things in their brain, and after they sit down at their testing station, they just jot down the answers really quickly. So they get something out of their brain and onto paper so that they can reference it throughout the exam. That's really the purpose of having something written down, so that you can, actually just like get something from your brain onto a piece of paper and use that information while you're taking the test. So it's really just kind of like an added bonus. Now, if you hear that and you're like, that's not for me, I don't need to write anything down, that's totally fine. You certainly don't have to use either of those things, and you're not like handing them in to anybody. It's just something that they give you so that you can write something down if you need to. Great question. Okay, love this question. Maggie asks, what should I do if I don't know an answer? So, a couple things. The first is to give yourself permission to guess. Guessing is way better than leaving a question blank. If you leave a question blank, you have a 0% chance of getting it right. And if you guess, you have a 20% chance of getting it right. Also, if you can eliminate a couple answer choices, then you increase your odds of guessing correctly. So I would really encourage you to see if you can eliminate one or two answer choices to just increase your guessing odds. But know that if you don't know an answer, it's okay. And you can just guess and move on. I also think it's important to remember here that a 100% score is not the goal. Like, you're not going to know every answer to every question on this test. There's just no way that you could possibly know everything that they're going to ask you. So it's really just okay if you encounter something that you've never heard of and you have to make a guess. So I think giving yourself permission is one of the most important things there. Okay, looks like those are the main questions that I'm seeing in the chat. So thank you so, so much for joining me today and for being a part of this little webinar. I love getting to support students in studying for and passing this board exam. I am super passionate about making sure that students show up feeling calm, confident, and prepared. So if you think of any other questions, don't hesitate to pop into my inbox. But otherwise, thank you so much for being here today, and enjoy the rest of your day, and good luck building a study plan and preparing for exam day. Thanks, everybody.